Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Great show. We're going to be talking about UFOs all night, and to do that, we're going to be talking to Peter Robbins, the author of the book Left at East Gate. And we're going to be talking about not just UFO incidents, but all kinds of stuff. He's given me carte blanche to open the UFO question door, so we're going to step right through. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. If you haven't gotten your copy of Icon Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, it's still only $1.99 from Amazon Digital Download. $1.99. It's a bargain. Let me tell you a little bit about Peter and get him on the air. Peter Robbins is an investigative writer, author, and lecturer, best known for his UFO-related papers, columns, articles, editorials, commentaries, lectures, and media appearances. He is a regular fixture on radio and has appeared as a guest on and been consulted to numerous television shows and documentaries. Again, his book is Left at East Gate, a first-hand account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, its cover-up, and investigation. So please welcome Peter Robbins. Hey, Peter, how's it going?
Good, Dr. Rita. How are you today?
I am doing great. I'm excited to have you on the show and being given the open area that I can ask you anything UFO related, because many times you don't get that opportunity with people.
You absolutely can, and I may even have some answers to your questions.
It's something. That's my answer to things. It's something. What got you interested in investigating UFOs in the first place?
Great start question. I had no interest in this subject whatsoever at all, zero, growing up. My only dream was to be an artist. I was a talented young one and studied oil painting when I was still in elementary school, graduated from the School of Visual Arts in New York City, I think the finest art school in the country, joined their faculty soon after, and I was soon on my way to living that dream. Had a loft downtown, was starting to show my work at galleries, and then one afternoon everything changed. I don't know, maybe you do, in the later 1970s, whether the term repressed memory syndrome was even part of the lexicon, but I had no idea I had a repressed memory. I guess that's kind of an oxymoron in a way. You don't. But for a number of reasons, I think I understand the mother of all repressed memories returned one afternoon of a very profoundly unambiguous UFO sighting. that I had had with my sister Helen when we were growing up on Long Island in a little village about 30 miles east of Manhattan. And when I say unambiguous, I mean I watched as 5 silvery white disc-shaped objects, metallic, came very quickly into our frame of vision and hung over the neighbor's house and just stood there. They were close enough to make out regular detailing around the edge of each, which we could only read as something that would have looked like windows on the side of a commercial airplane if it was close enough to see them. And we looked and looked and looked, and it was overwhelming to me. I was an adolescent. I was completely living a very innocent childhood, and I guess I had implicitly accepted the adult world's idea about such phenomena, that they're nonsense, except in the B movies that I'd occasionally see on Saturday morning at our local theater. And I basically shut down around it. I also intuitively knew about this ridicule of the subject. And at a time where, all I wanted was some cooler clothes and to have a girlfriend, I knew this was something that I was not going to talk about to friends. And so within a matter of a few weeks, I had successfully put it out of my mind. Jump ahead more than 14 years, and this memory comes roaring back like a freight train. I never have had an experience like it before or after. It just was like a tape loop running through my mind, and I thought briefly I might be having some kind of mental episode of going crazy. I mean, how could you forget something like this? But I knew it had happened, and I finally calmed myself down and decided there's only one thing to do here, which is call my sister and see if she remembers this too. My sister and I were very close our whole lives. She passed away in January 2000. And as I was moving into my career as a painter, living in New York City's Chinatown, she was an aspiring poet living in the East Village, a mile or so north of me. And I called her, but was very careful in setting up what I wanted to say by telling her that I thought if I told her flat out what I had remembered, she'd say yes or no. And I wouldn't know for sure in my heart whether she shared that memory. So I set the scene. I described the weather that morning, where we were standing relative to each other on the front lawn, what the approximate time of day, and she just cut me off mid-sentence and said, "Stop, I know what you're talking about," and proceeded to confirm my memories, which was a very split experience for me. Essentially, oh my God, they're real, and oh my God, they're real. And then she said something that changed my life, really. She said, "But there's more," and went on to describe memories from that day, memories that I have heard word for word hundreds of times in slight variations over the intervening decades from people we call UFO abductees, people who have been taken aboard and returned. And she was describing it from the point of view of her 12-year-old self. And my first thought was, my God, Helen's gone crazy. But in a matter of seconds, I caught myself and said, right, it was okay 4 seconds ago to see 5 flying saucers with windows over the Parker's house, but now Helen's crazy. I knew my sister well enough to know she wasn't a liar. In the mid-'70s, this was not a topic that was on TV, in books. There were a few references in popular culture to the Betty and Barney Hill case from 1961. Couldn't have interested me less. And that afternoon, I became obsessed with what happened to my sister and what is the story with this phenomena. And quite unwillingly in a way, because I resented it. I had a dream and I was following it. And all of a sudden, something more important and more compelling had intervened in my life, and I didn't like it. It took a lot of the joy out of the bubble I lived in the New York City art world. I continued to teach painting, to show my work for a number of years more, but there was a certain amount of play acting that was going on in it. And as I was doing my art, which now was UFO obsessed, and isolating me a bit in the fine arts community in New York, I was building my UFO library, ultimately meeting people who would go on to become mentors and colleagues. And that happened 40 years ago last month. So this has taken up now the lion's share of my life. And by rights, on a certain level, if we had been in another place at another time, we wouldn't be talking right now. And hopefully I would be in my big loft in Lower Manhattan, arranging to ship paintings to some show in Germany or what have you. Isn't life funny?
Well, and as you were telling your story and you were describing the ships that you saw, what was going through my mind was I thought it was a little bizarre to have created a repressed memory just by having a sighting. But then as you continued your story and talked about, not necessarily your abduction, but your sister's abduction, the whole thing made a whole lot more sense as to why the memory got repressed.
Well, let me flesh it out even more for you. I literally remember looking up at these things and going through something I now term the checklist reaction. And I've interviewed, I'm sure, several hundred people that have described a similar moment where they look up, they're living their lives, and all of a sudden they look up and they see something or things that challenge everything they know. And again, for an adolescent, where you're so hyper concerned about what other people think of you, and you're not satisfied with anything in your life, and you're filled with sexual longing that isn't being resolved. I literally went, not planes, kites, blimps, balloons, helicopters, dirigibles, reflections from the ground, strange shaped clouds, birds, and then you kind of hit the wall. And that fear of ridicule combined with just being a kid overwhelmed. This meant everything I knew might be wrong. Nobody had prepared me for this. And that is a very driving force to push down something, because nothing else fits. I should also say, as Helen and I continued to talk about it, she said, I never forgot it. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't reflect on it briefly and either use it to feel special. I mean, she had memories of rising into the air with her long hair blowing for the only time in her life, looking down on the top of our house, getting smaller as the bottom, especially of one of these things, was getting bigger. And then she was in it with a bunch of beings. And this was years before the term gray was even being used to describe that archetypical type other intelligence. I don't really like the word alien. It just doesn't work for me. But she's being walked through a hallway with a bunch of these little ones, shorter than her, and one very tall one. Then she's on a table being examined. No fear, but she described them as little doctors with big heads and big black eyes who talked to her in her head. And the things they were saying also were archetypical. You're special. We've seen you before. We'll see you again. We won't hurt you. We love you. Except in one moment that informed her opinion about these things, and she didn't ask for this experience and was not thrilled about it, to put it mildly. When the voice in her head said, "We love you, we won't hurt you," she was experiencing pain from whatever they were doing on that metal table. And as this post-period moved on in our life, and we both moved out into the world more, myself as a writer and also working in off-Broadway theater, Helen went on to become a very accomplished and very well-regarded pop musician, a singer-songwriter, brilliant performer, gold and platinum record award winner, wrote lyrics for a number of great Blue Oyster Cult songs, very popular band in the New York area, all at the beginning of the whole so-called punk movement, knew all of the wonderful people that came up at that time, from Patti Smith to Debbie Harry and the Ramones and all these amazing musicians that I got to hear, in the latter 70s, who went on to major careers in a little club called CBGB's on the Bowery. But Helen became an adamant activist in terms of never backing down on her memories of her experiences, working with Bud Hopkins, really the father of the scientific study of this phenomena extensively. And right up until really the week that she died, was very outspoken and felt it was part of her responsibility to be an educator to folks about the reality of the fact that this does happen to some people.
Well, that's quite the story, Peter.
Yep.
Quite the story. And I think it's cool because it's coming from your experience, and so there is this, I really have this need to know and understand what happened to me. So I think that's cool. But we're gonna move on here.
Yep.
Over the years, a number of cases have gotten really good media coverage. Roswell, your book about the Rendlesham Forest incident, Stephenville. I mean, there's a bunch of them out there.
Yes.
And if you were to pick which one you feel has the most, which one seems the most compelling to you?
Roswell, in a way, is in a class by itself. It is the big one that set everything in motion. It's one that I became quite interested in early on, although when this happened, this memory returned, it was still an unknown case. It didn't break until about 1980 or so. And then Stanton T. Friedman, arguably kind of the dean of UFO studies at this point, our senior researcher, lecturer, personality in the field, found a key military witness in this, and it became part of our culture. The thing about Roswell, and I was just there a few weeks ago for about the half-dozenth time, is that it happened in 1947. And even though we have a lot of credible information on it, there are a few people left who were involved in it, all of them in their 90s now. And it may sound biased, but Left at East Gate, which I co-authored with Larry Warren, who was in fact an eyewitness to one of the parts of these 3 nights of UFO activity in late December 1980 that go under the umbrella name of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. In working on the book and in the years since, where I've really not been able to walk away from this because new information continues to break in it, it may sound biased, but I would have to say, for me, the best case that we have to work with, to educate people around, the one that could break this thing wide open if our Congress ever had the courage to have open hearings on this, would be the Rendlesham Forest incident. And the reason for that is that within this one series of events, you have a microcosm of almost all of the subspecialty areas of study that embody the field of UFO studies, from confirmed physical evidence, soil analysis that reveals extraordinary anomalous changes to organic material, multiple credible military and civilian eyewitnesses, a military paper trail, a civilian paper trail, photographic evidence, missing time, cover-up. It goes on, and it's been the subject of, I'm sure, hundreds and hundreds of articles, specialty conferences, probably at least half a dozen books now. And even though it is now, 35 plus years since it happened, it is still a hotbed of contention, of new witnesses coming forward, of breaking new aspects within the story. So again, there is a bias there. I've been involved in this case one way or another for 28 years, and it ain't going away. It is not going away.
What, well, for the listeners, and if we could just be brief here, what happened in Rendlesham that makes it, well, what happened there in general?
Yeah. Again, it took place on 3 consecutive nights between Christmas and New Year's 1980 in very close proximity to 2 major NATO bases, RAF Woodbridge, which was a British air base, and RAF Bentwaters, which is an American air base. On the first night, unknowns were seen coming in over the weapons storage area, and that is as a nuclear weapons storage area at a time, and this is sort of a side but an important story, our country was in violation of our treaty with the United Kingdom. We weren't supposed to have nukes, and we did. And they were seen to shine lights down into the weapons storage area, like laser lights, and you could see them right down to the ground because there was so much moisture in the air. On that night also, a law enforcement cop named John Burroughs observed a light go down in the woods and radioed in. This was at a very tense moment during the Cold War. And he and a sergeant named Jim Peniston were driven out to the area, then proceeded on foot and encountered a machine of undetermined origin that was kind of in a clearing and not very large. Their accounts differ slightly, and they are both aware that they have missing time, but it left physical traces. The second night, among other things, a sergeant named Bonnie Tamplin, the only woman involved, was in the area in a military vehicle. It was a temperate night. Her window was down, and some kind of light phenomena flew into the cab of her truck, and so emotionally destabilized her, she was removed from active duty. The third night, and this again is compressing a great deal, a second night also, they were observed over the area. The third night, 2 major events. One, the deputy base commander and a team of about 6 named individuals were in the woods looking into this, and another unknown came in right over them, shone a light right down to their feet. And then, I don't know, 500 yards away, half a mile, my co-author and a contingent of United States Air Force security cops were ordered to surround a phenomena that was essentially a self-illuminated ground fog in a farmer's field, which by a series of events soon became the site where a larger craft of undetermined origin appeared. 3 beings also. The men who were involved were put through what I would call Disneyland on acid. They were emotionally destabilized. They were given disinformation, which is not necessarily a lie. Disinformation is a mixture of truth, conjecture, confabulation to produce a certain result. In this case, logic tells me that it was to shut these guys up and to let them know that if they didn't, there would be trouble. My co-author is a classic whistleblower, and after he left the service with an honorable discharge and a massive case of post-traumatic stress, as all of the witnesses still suffer from, as though they had been in combat. What they were put through by members of our intelligence community was unconscionable, Dr. Rita. But he was the one to blow the whistle, and ultimately, because of information he supplied to a known researcher here in the States, a Freedom of Information Act action was put into effect, causing the release of a report that had been written by the then deputy base commander. When it was made public in England in 1983, the case exploded internationally, and it has been known, studied, and breaking ever since.
Well, and it sounds like as more people hear about the case, and the level of credibility. I mean, we're talking about an Air Force base.
Oh, it's extraordinary level of credibility. Yeah.
I mean, that's the part that doesn't make any sense to me. Do you think that by having, well, actually, let me ask a different question. What kind of evidence? I mean, we have observational evidence, we have the recording that comes from that sighting, we
That's right.
have the notebook, that he took his notes at that time. Um, and this doesn't have to be this incident by itself, but what other kinds of physical evidence or evidence do we have? Because that seems to be people's biggest issue. Well, there's
Yes,
no
and it should
evidence.
be.
There's no
It should be.
evidence.
The most credible evidence for me comes directly from the physical sight of Larry Warren's and the men he was with encounter in the farmer's field, and it's remarkable. And it's so overpowering that for physical evidence analysis to reveal hard information years after the fact is not the standard. Immediately after, much better chance. Larry and I first went back, and I think last year I made my 25th trip back to the area, and we made my first trip out to that field in February of 1988. And he had not been back to that field since that night. And walking through the woods to get there, I'm recording everything. He is rather tense, as you might imagine. He's going back to the place where his life literally jumped the tracks and never got back on. And at that moment, and I'm already 6 or 7 months into studying this in an armchair sense, I know where I am. And when that forest broke away and I could see the field and the stand of trees, the farmer's house, I knew just where I was. And this is all on audio tape, which I should say has been voice stress analyzed on 2 separate occasions by 2 completely different teams of individuals. His arm shot out and he pointed right to the spot and he said, it sat right there. And if you were to listen to the tape, you'd hear several moments of silence. And he follows up by saying, I might not be word for word, but of course it's a coincidence that the area where it sat is discolored. It was February, it was a fallow field, there were no crop in. And because I've trained myself the way I have, my first thought was not, oh my God, look, there's a mark that the thing left 8 years and 2 months earlier. It was, yeah, that is a coincidence. An interesting one, but yeah, it's a coincidence. It could be a play of light. It's plowed ground. I don't know whether it's convex or concave out there. It could be a lightning strike. Maybe they dumped fertilizer there 6 months ago and it wasn't graded out fully. But the more we stayed in the area and came and went from it, it still looked different. I was shooting 35 millimeter film. I had a bunch of those little plastic film canisters. I went into the middle of the area, took some samples, went out into the field and took others. When we got back to our bed and breakfast, we studied them. Our host was a science teacher. We did a very simple test of taking 2 identical sized jar lids, putting an equal amount of soil from the affected area, seemingly affected, and a control sample, then equal amounts of water. The control sample with a couple of stirs with a tablespoon became mud immediately. I couldn't get that other sample to become mud. It either clumped and sank to the bottom or sat like a film on top of it. I went back a year and a half later in the summer, and the exact same spot now had a crop in there that had completely gone to hay. It was all yellow, the entire field. Very dramatic photos, by the way. And except for that area, which was bright green. And so I went back again a year later, this time having consulted a laboratory in Massachusetts that did soil analysis. I went back with large plastic containers from them, followed their instructions in terms of collecting soil from the area of interest, control samples from out in the field, and those samples were professionally analyzed. And what they told us was this. Number one, the soil looked different physically. We were told that wasn't a big deal in a large farmer's field. However, structurally, it looked very different under a scanning electron microscope. We were told that seed germination tests where they, try seeds and they grow them in the control samples and the affected sample. In the control samples, everything grew just fine, normal rate. In the affected sample, no matter what they grew, it took longer for it to grow, and the only things that would grow were quote unquote mutant strains of the original plant.
Kind of like it was like radioactive or something like that.
No, but the plants were not normal in terms of their DNA composition. We learned that in this particular soil, in this region, there are tiny flecks of metallic particles, maybe no bigger than pieces of sand, that form a certain component of the soil. In the control samples, it was normal. In the affected sample, it was more than 4 times the amount that it was in the surrounding area. When I asked what that indicated of our soil analyst, who I'm still in touch with, very respected chemist named Matthew Moniz, M-O-N-I-Z, he said there's only one thing that really could account for it, which was something had exerted such a powerful electromagnetic effect on the area that it had literally pulled these tiny metallic particles into that area. Finally, this took place 5 or 6 miles from the coast. So it's normal that you would expect a certain amount of sand to be in that soil. In the control samples, it was absolutely normal. In the affected sample, there was no sand. It had melted. It had been reduced to an interim form of glass. This is phenomenal physical evidence. And again, when you overlay it on, let's characterize it as my objective observation of the witness coming into the area for the very first time since that night in December 1980, having that reaction pointing to that area immediately, that the tapes, first-generation microcassette audio tapes, are voice stress analyzed. There is no deception in the voices. Then superimpose on it the other events that happened in very close proximity with multiple witnesses, etc. You do what's called in police work, triangulating, the way that a lawyer might build a case of different kinds of physical, anecdotal, witness-related, historic, photographic evidence that all reinforces the unrelated evidence in the area. For me, that is extremely compelling.
I think that's interesting that I hadn't heard that they found glass. And, I do a lot of study on ancient mythology and old stuff, really old stuff.
Yeah.
And, like in Egypt, there's the green glass where they feel like there was some kind of a nuclear detonation. And in India.
And Baalbek in Lebanon, is it in Lebanon, Baalbek, or Syria, Iraq?
It's in Lebanon.
Yeah. We have these anomalies that go back to time immemorial. But again, to find silica in that 30 or 40 foot area and sand in all the surrounding area, for people who say, well, it might have been a psychological operation. Well, there may have been a component that was, but no PSYOPs operation melts sand into glass. Again, this is one part of this puzzle of information. And it's frustrating to me because people focus on the most sensational. For example, one of the men involved claims that and this is Jim Penniston, and I'm certainly not talking out of school here. He published it in a book that he co-wrote last year, that when he actually stepped up to the craft to touch it and touch a mark in a line of symbols, that quote unquote, well, I'm paraphrasing, a binary code of thousands of ones and zeros downloaded into his head, and under hypnosis, he learned that it was time travelers from our future who had come and given him a message for humanity to be given to humanity at a further point. John Burroughs, who was with him at the time, has no memory of him touching the craft, and Jim didn't even mention it to him for almost 30 years. There's real problems with that, not the least of which is that the likelihood is far stronger that Jim was the target, the victim, however you want to characterize it, of a specific disinformation operation geared to have one of the witnesses say something so sensational and so wild and so media grabbing that it would take attention away from the more, in the mind of the tabloid mentality, the evidence that I just cited, which is incredibly important and verifiable.
Okay, so I want to kind of go along a little path you have because this is one of my questions. You talked about Jim Pennison talking about the ones and zeros on the piece of paper, which we talked about because I had Nick Pope and Jim on the show talking about the Rendlesham incident.
Yes,
and I thought it was really
with
interesting about the binary code that they received. And it's like, okay, so what did it say? But they didn't tell me that it was, I don't know. It didn't come to me in that moment of them sharing it that it was some kind of like channeled information. And
Dr.
there
Rita,
are, and I'm just using that as kind of the segue.
Sure.
There are a lot of people that say they talk to the Zeta Reticulans or they're in communication with the Galactic Federation, which I have another question about them, or all of these other groups. And I know that Stephen Greer's people are always trying to communicate with the extraterrestrials. What do you think about that whole thing?
Not a lot that's very supportive. I think Nick has been tremendously remiss in kind of aiding and abetting, taking people's attention away from the truly important scientific areas of this. When you read his chapter in their book, Encounter in the Rendlesham Forest, on the binary code, it's very kind of serious and self-sanctimonious, and he literally dances around all the things it may be except for the fact that how did Jim Pennison, and Jim says 24 hours after the fact, and this is him talking, in his room, he remembers all those thousands of ones and zeros in exact order and copies them out onto 16 pages of his little field notebook, and that when they're translated by binary, and binary code is contemporary computer code. I'm not a computer person. This was kind of my introduction to it when Jim first talked about it in public at an event that I was part of in England in December 28th, 2010, the 30th anniversary of the event. Nick, who has a strong background working with the Ministry of Defense, which was employer for over 20 years, he never once even mentions the possibility that maybe Jim wasn't contacted by time travelers and that this was put in his head by all too terrestrial beings to, again, take attention away. It's a standard technique. The message has been translated, and it's right there in the book. It is the alleged latitude and longitude coordinates of 6 mystical sites around the world, including Sedona, Arizona, a temple in China, another temple in Greece, a mythical sunken island off the coast of Ireland called Hy-Brasil, and it has about half a dozen phrases that, with respect, sound like bad science fiction, outtakes. And Nick postulates in their book that perhaps it's a code within a code, and that as time passes and the experts can take that information, it will somehow make a broader sense and give us the true message from the time travelers from the future, from I think the year 8100 or something. For me, it's the emperor's new clothes. You're looking at this totally lighter than air postulate, and who am I to say it's not true? But for me, I've learned over the years in investigating the UFO phenomena and looking at life, often it is the most mundane. It is the most real world answer to a question rather than the most exotic one, unless you can really back it up by the process of elimination and research. And I have a great deal of problems with their book, which I address in a book that I wrote last year and put online for anybody to download at no cost. It's called Deliberate Deception. And Dr. Rita, you can download it. Any of your listeners can by simply going to a website for a wonderful English publication called Phenomena Magazine. In fact, you should have a subscription to it. It's a monthly, it's free. It covers the full beat on everything from UFOs to ancient mysteries. And if you go to their homepage, you'll see a box that says Special Reports. And you simply click on the 7 kind of cyber books that are there in order, and you have downloaded my entire 450-page book, which actually is only less than 100 pages of text, but a database of well over 300 pages of material that my co-author and I collected over the decades, making anybody that has that book, if they want to read the whole thing, something of an authority on the case itself with more raw data than anyone has ever put out at any time. So going on, though, as far as the Zeta Reticulans and, the Nordics and all of this, for me, nothing I have ever seen, and I have a lot of respect and affection for a lot of the people that I've met who are adamant that this is the way it is. It was either channeled or it came to them in a dream, or like Stephen Greer, they allege they have, sources within the intelligence community. And Stephen, who is certainly a very well-known and very popular author, lecturer, and personality on the subject, has acted, people are complex. His disclosure event in 2000 was very important. And he brought together at the National Press Club in Washington a very credible group of military witnesses, pilots, and the like, including my co-author Larry Warren, to talk about this in a public forum. He really pioneered that. Stephen Bassett, the head of the disclosure movement, so to say, has gone on to follow in the best part of his footsteps. But Stephen has said things over the years like, there are 58, I think that's the number, alien races visiting this planet. My reaction is, please, if you were the president of the United States, the head of the NSA, the head of MI7, and the supreme ruler of 7 alien races all rolled into one, how could you know definitively, categorically, empirically, that there are 58 visiting? Steve has also said that...
Well, and he's not the only one, but go ahead.
Of course. He has also said that in the abduction phenomena, all of the abductions where people suffer, are frightened, are made anxious, they're fake abductions. They're done by some secret working group, within the military intelligence community. How does he know that? He knows it because he knows all aliens are good. And only the people who have positive experiences, this is nonsense to me. And maybe. But when people come up to me and they say, the Zetas have been here for 470,000 years. This is the reason they're here. These are the machines they fly. This is what they have for lunch. And these ones come from here. I am compelled to say, this is fascinating. How do you know this? And there's only several answers. One is they told me, which I have problems with. The other is, again, it was a channeled message. I read it in a book. I saw it in a documentary. I have a really good friend who knows. Until we can get anything credible in a real-world, three-dimensional sense to back up these allegations, and a lot of people are going to be on my case for this, and so be it. For me, it remains a part of the mythology, the legend, the lore, the beliefs, the claims, the fears surrounding this incredibly complex subject, but it's in a very different category than real physical evidence, multiply witnessed events like Stevensville. A lot of people, when Stevensville happened, how people in all over the world, we make generalizations about people in other countries and other regions. Northerners make fun of Southerners and vice versa. urbanites have fun at the expense of rural folks and vice versa. I heard people say, even bearing in mind that the Stevensville event not only was multiply witnessed, but even if these people weren't PhDs, they were smart, credible individuals. There was a component of law enforcement personnel. And what they observed was so overwhelming, described as at least the size of an aircraft carrier, that it was simply dismissed as, the wild tales of country people. This is insulting. Stevensville is a terribly important case, and anybody who was involved in it as a witness knows it was a life-changing experience. So we're dealing, this is an unregulated area of study, and it's like herding cats. Anybody can be a ufologist if they call themselves one, a word that I tend to shy away from because it has, with good cause, drawn great controversy on itself because it is so filled with outrageous, unsubstantiatable claims. And, right next door is somebody like a Stanton T. Friedman, a nuclear physicist who's been involved in this work for more than half a century, who presents cases that you could hang somebody on in a court of law if it was, slightly different situation. So we're faced with a real challenge in this work. And again, the lack of discipline and people who, that wonderful poster that Fox Mulder, we were introduced to in his office in the pilot episode of The X-Files, which I thought was so thoughtful in its way. I want to believe. And I guess most of us do want to believe, but don't want to believe so much that you simply believe and call that evidence.
Thank you for saying what you did about that information, because I sit on that same, and I'm going to say, fence.
Yep.
I believe in ghosts. I believe in beings that are non-corporeal, that communicate with us.
Yeah.
What they are they extraterrestrials? It's like, well, they're not Earthlings, so okay. But somebody made this comment to me, and I put it in the back of my mind because it was true. The people that are bringing forward this information, they're not all saying the same thing.
That's right.
And so if we have these different people that are channeling Zeta Reticuli, they're not bringing through the same person, and they're not bringing through the same information, which makes you go, okay, so now we don't even have any consistency in what's coming through.
Next month, I return to the beautiful state of Maine, and I will be co-hosting and emceeing a very special conference. Like a lot of my colleagues, I speak fairly regularly at events large and small around the country, in my case, other countries. And this is a unique conference. It's called Experiencers Speak. And it kind of turns the tables on a conventional UFO conference where you'd have, people like a Dr. Greer or Nick Pope or myself or Stanton Friedman or any number of other known commodities. And maybe every once in a while, a well-known experiencer or abductee, like a Travis Walton or a Linda Corteil from Bud Hopkins' remarkably well-documented witness the Brooklyn Bridge UFO abduction case. At this conference, you have 2 or 3 professionals, and everybody else is an experiencer, an abductee, a contactee. Some of them extremely well known, most of them not well known, and a few of them going public for the very first time. And their thoughts, feelings, beliefs are all treated with respect by all of us. We hear what they have to say. We stay up late into the night informally and discuss things, hang out together. It's a very special event, and I am plugging it here and now. If you can possibly get to this conference, it's August 27th and 28th, the latter part of the Friday and all day Saturday. It's in beautiful Portland, Maine. Just Google Experiencers Speak, sign up, and join us. You won't forget it. Again, who are any of us to have the colossal intellectual arrogance to say what is or what isn't in the greater world of the unknown? For me, I am very careful to separate what I know and have evidence on and could prove in a court of law from what I absolutely believe to be true, but can't substantiate, to what I think might be true, to what I fear might be true, to what I suspect, etc. That frustrates some people. I'm very quick at answering questions with "I don't know" if I don't know the answer. I don't have opinions on certain cases because I don't feel I have enough knowledge on them to have an intelligent opinion. And rather than have an uninformed opinion or a stupid opinion, I'd rather have none until I learn more about it. Again, other people jump into this, embrace everything, and live with these kind of childlike ideas of everything is known and sketched out, and why not just start a new religion? Because all you're doing is creating a belief system based on faith, supported by your belief in it and other people who share the same belief. That's lovely. And if it works for you, great. But don't confuse it with having established the reality of something. Also, this whole phenomena is riddled with deception on their part and on our part. And as Bud Hopkins used to say to me sometimes, how can we trust them in the broader scale any more than we trust the United States Air Force? Also, whether or not they're from other planets, universes, solar systems, dimensions, is still, to a great degree, speculative. Also, that there are probably many of thems coming and going from our planet who perhaps share the same sweep of possibilities that we do, from nobility, kindness, idealism, to absolute pathology, who to them, they may see us as their little brothers and sisters. We may be them a million years ago, or we may be food, or, useless beings occupying territory that they want. Again, I'm talking in extremes here. And I guess the good news is that if the bad news were real and acted upon, we'd all be, in the salt mines now, looking straight ahead, wearing little brain control caps and, like little ants doing their bidding. On an allegorical way, perhaps that may be the case. I've heard people say, well, they are really in charge of the government and everything, and, we're just puppets.
Well,
that may be the case. I don't know.
And we need to go to break. And
Yep.
That's a great place to come back, even though you said I don't know. But let's come back to that, okay? But we need to go to a commercial break, okay? Yep. Okay, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Peter Robbins about UFO stuff. His book is Left at East Gate, a first-hand account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, its cover-up and investigation. And we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. We're here talking to Peter Robbins about UFOs, and we're going to get into the juicy stuff now. We're going to start talking about all the stuff you see on Facebook: underground bases, reptilians, human alien hybrids, the secret government agenda, all that good stuff. Peter is the author of, or co-author of, Left at East Gate, a first-hand account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, its cover-up and investigation. Peter, how's it going?
Good.
Okay. When we went to break, because I already had this on my list because I want to talk about all the juicy stuff that you hear about on Facebook, which, if it's on Facebook, it has to be true.
Absolutely.
about.
Everything on the internet's correct.
I have to tell you, I host this one group, and this one gentleman, very, very nice, has just been going back and going on this whole thing that the Bible is 100% true. And I keep making these comments, there are other books out there, and maybe he needs to read something else, and just trying to be nice. And it just made me think of that was, okay, so it saying that everything in the Bible is 100% true is like saying, well, I saw it on the internet, so it must be true. Anyway.
Well, for a person of faith, of course, that's blasphemous. I grew up in a tradition where I understood that the Bible was a combination of things. It was actual accounts written by real people of real things, that it was, I guess you'd now call it myths recycled from older cultures. The flood, other stories in the Bible appear thousands of years before in other ancient traditions, that it was allegories, that it was parables, that it was stories, all calculated to teach lessons, ideally, to live a better, more moral life. And for a book that has an awful lot of wholesale killing in it, and a God that you're supposed to fear, it's problematic for somebody like me. But again, to a person of faith, whatever their faith, that holy book of theirs is sacrosanct. And you don't mess with it. They were brought up in a tradition where that's what they were taught. That's what they teach their children. And the most extreme forms of it, of course, we see every day in the Middle East with these fundamentalist Islamic maniacs who will kill another Muslim because they're not the right kind of Muslim. Although one could say the same about, the history of Catholics and Protestants over the world. And, it's human nature. I would say mankind, but it really is the world of men who have superimposed all of this fear on love and so highly mystified it. And you're on our side, or we're going to kill you, or we're not going. There's only one true faith, which I think is a terrible thing to say. There are many paths to the same places, and to say that somebody who has lived a decent, contributing, caring, valuable life is going to go to hell because they didn't follow the teachings of living a decent, caring, contributing life under your tradition. Jesus wept. I mean, come on. We're off on a tangent here, but if you're a believer, you're a believer, and you're not open to seeing things from a slightly different facet of the diamond. And to take a little of our time here, at one point, this is about 20 years ago, I took out of the library, adding the 2 copies I had here, borrowed from friends, I had 6 or 7 different translations of the Bible. And I research on things that interest me, and the story of Ezekiel interested me. For a number of reasons. And I went line by line, word by word, through all of the translations. They're remarkably similar. And you have Ezekiel, a regular person in his time, who observes this fiery wheel within a wheel come out of the sky. It lands an angel. In his terminology, the original word angel goes back to the root word in Sumerian of emissary or go-between. It's not a religious word. The thing is metal, the being is encased in metal, and they begin a dialogue and an exchange. If you are, a strict constitutionalist of the Bible, it is what it is, and it's a manifestation of one of God's angels. If you think outside of the box, then it may well be an event of advanced technology and a being from another place landing on Earth and interacting with somebody back in that time for any number of reasons. And, the idea that was introduced in the 1960s by the Swiss-German journalist Erich von Däniken in his multi-million selling book, Chariots of Fire, and many, many books since, introduced the idea of ancient astronauts, now, of course, the theme of a very popular television show. The work was taken up by more scholarly people in the decades to follow. Does anybody think that if the UFO phenomena is real and does represent truly other intelligences coming and going from our Earth, that it began in 1947? That was when it began in modern times, but it probably goes back to time immemorial. And whether or not we are, they are looking over us at our evolution and waiting for us to evolve to a point where we can join what some people call the Galactic Federation, or whether or not we're somebody's graduate experiment gone horribly wrong, is all food for thought and all open to, informed speculation.
Well, let me ask you this question, because you have a good mind. We're talking a little bit about the Bible and these other ancient traditions, and I draw a lot of information from those sources. And what is your thought about the concept of myth being history, and or do you think that we can take our mythological record and use that as evidence?
I think that it's a great question, Dr. Louise. I think some myths are just that. They're myths. Other myths are, my best take is that they are the remaining fragments from genuine real histories. Plato wrote about this quote-unquote mythical place called Atlantis. Like many fairly well-grounded people in the world, I'm convinced that Atlantis was a very real place with a very advanced civilization. Again, human arrogance and folly being what it is, to talk to a classic academic about advanced civilizations going back, beyond the Greeks, Romans, Sumerians, Hittites, etc., 7,000, 10,000, 20, 30,000 years, they'll laugh in your face. But they dismiss the possibility that real Earth cataclysms, a shifting of tectonic plates, could have swallowed up a whole continent and left nothing except stories of the survivors that were passed along and became the basis of myths for the next civilization. Many of your listeners are familiar with the remarkable iconoclast Charles Fort, one of the few people who had a word named after his name and put into the English language, Fortean, Fortean, which is the study of all of this wild, anomalous evidence of things that don't fit into the norm of science, history, our understanding of human evolution on Earth. I think some myths are just that. They're charming stories that were created to entertain or to give an object lesson or morality lesson. And other myths are rock-solid residuals of actual history that really happened, that we only have fragments of, and it's damned hard to prove to, the so-called straight establishment world.
Okay. All right. I'm looking at the clock going, all right, we need to just keep moving along.
Yep.
Moving along. Okay. When we went to break, coming back to that, because I want to talk about the things that, obviously are true because I saw it on TV and on the internet.
Yeah.
But the concept of the government or extraterrestrials controlling the government through, the Skull and Bones and, the Bilderbergs and that whole thing. What's your thought on that? And do you, other than, what we see in the news, do you think there's any evidence to support that it's actually extraterrestrials and not just a bunch of greedy guys doing it?
Well, first of all, I would never describe myself as a conspiracist, but one has to be naive to think that the entire history of humanity isn't informed and at times redirected or heavily impacted on by conspiracies. And let's remember, the root of that word is two or more people plotting something in private usually with a nefarious or negative aim in terms of co-opting power. In that sense, yes, you can almost define history by conspiracies. And of course, there are organizations, and have always been going back into ancient times, of the most powerful people at that time following in a tradition of passing along control to a small pool of people. I guess in one sense, in a more informal way, you could describe some of the one percenters in the United States as inheritors of that tradition, if not formally in terms of, Bilderberger or Rothschild or Skull and Bones kind of group. As to whether or not influence is being exerted on members of these groups who come to hold great positions of power in the world, it's purely speculative. I have never seen anything that I would call actual court-level evidence of it, but I can't fully discount it because, again, the arrogance of saying that something isn't without any more proof than you have to say something is not okay with me. The very simple mantra that debunkers go by, and for anybody out there that is a serious student of the subjects that Rita and I are spending our lives here on, remember, skepticism is a good thing. You should always be your own best devil's advocate. You should always challenge your own views. They should always be open to change if evidence presents itself to give you cause to make that change. Debunking is basically saying it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. And I'm here to pat you on the head and tell you that UFOs are all swamp gas, mass hysteria, a temperature inversion, a Russian secret weapon, et cetera, et cetera. The arrogance and contempt for the truth that goes along with saying that you know the unknowable and you completely dismiss one whole realm of possibility because you have a problem with it, for me, is not only beneath contempt, it's laughable.
Well, okay. And I agree with you with there isn't any evidence. The question that I always come back to with that whole thing is if they're here controlling what's going on, and I believe they've been here for eons, forever. Sure. Yeah. I like that word. Why give us control in the first place? And why hide their presence?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's very difficult to come up with answers or even models for that in what we'll laughingly call the real world. I'm not a big science fiction fan, but I was very fortunate as a kid when I was still very young, 7 or 8 years old, to be introduced to the works of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. I was a big fan of the very first generation of Star Trek, kind of lost interest in it after that. And, there are certain key science fiction writers, Ray Bradbury, certainly the great Gene Roddenberry, who was the creator of Star Trek, who gave us some models to contemplate. We learn early on in the very first incarnation of Star Trek that the Federation, the world government on the Earth that, the USS Enterprise is a ship of, that there is something called the Prime Directive. And it's very interesting. What it is that in your exploration of the star systems and all, when you come to a planet inhabited by intelligent, sentient, humanoid-type beings, and you interact with them, never, ever show all your cards if they are technologically beneath you or well beneath you, because doing so would, in so many words, completely blow their minds and has the potential to overwhelm them and have their civilization disintegrate. We have models of this on Earth going back to the earliest times of colonial penetration into very primitive areas when the British, marched troops into the middle of Africa, when the conquistadors, came into the Americas. The native populations were faced with these, for them, supernatural beings with supernatural powers. You have a stick, you aim it at somebody, there's a huge explosion, and then the person is dead. They're wearing things that are brightly colored with these metal buttons on it. And you know what I'm talking about. Carl Jung at one point wrote something terribly poignant, and I'm damned if I remember what book it was in, but around the time of the First World War, as I recall, he had a conversation with a man who had been or was a tribal elder medicine man in an African native tribe. And he talked about that time when out of nowhere, these white people came into their world. And the term that he used, I think, was, our dreams died. Perhaps these other intelligences, whoever they are, where they come from, have a certain protectiveness toward us and don't want to totally emotionally destabilize us. Look, you and I, and a relatively small component, even though we think we may have a larger foothold in the world, we represent a very modest point of the American and the world population who are basically ready for what we'll call disclosure. However, for the rest of the world, they ain't ready. And for, giant motherships are coming over the largest 50 cities overnight, as the opening of the very otherwise mediocre CBS miniseries V, as in Victory, begins. Wonderful premise. You wake up in the morning, there's a mile cross ship hanging over London, New York, Paris, Rome, 50 cities in the world. Game over. That it might be so jarring. Well, our economies might collapse. There might be panic in the streets, looting, people using it as religious vendettas, thinking it's the end of the world, et cetera, et cetera. This is, and it's a concern I have about disclosure per se. What are we setting in motion, and what exactly are we talking about? And if you were to say, if every world leader at the same moment timed it to go on their relative, media venues and say in their own words, my fellow Americans, Indonesians, Chinese people, whatever, I am here to tell you that since 1947 and earlier, we have known that we are not alone in the universe. And you think people are going to settle for that? Well, tell us the implications of this. What else is happening? Sooner or later, you're going to have to talk about stuff that may be very disturbing to them, so much so that the world will change in ways that we don't want it to change. How do you manage such a change? Again, the bottom line is I have no idea how to answer a question of their motivations. We're not them. And the people that say, well, the reason they don't do it is such and such, that is pure speculation. It may be informed speculation, but none of us know the answer to that question.
Okay. I'm just going to move along because I have a list. You can probably be like, I don't know.
I'm good at that.
Okay, so kind of sticking with this whole government thing, what about the concept of extraterrestrials interacting with the government? What was it, Eisenhower? They supposedly met with. And I'm going to throw another piece on here just for saving some time. Yeah. And the whole Serpo project, Serpo. I don't know. They told me I didn't pronounce it right, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Where they sent some humans to some other planet to live for a bunch of years, and it was like, huh?
When I hear people occasionally with a very straight face and solemn bearing talk about, the Eisenhower Treaty of 1954 with the aliens, I want to throw a drink in their face. It's like, get real, folks. Who knows what may have happened? But to talk about this stuff as though it definitely did happen, or, this particular project, what do you have to back it up? You have nothing, except that you think it's cool and interesting. Occasionally, what we'll call documents emerge on things like this that are inevitably proved to be specious or completely unsupportable, and are the work of somebody who wants to advance this story, this myth, this legend along and be accepted by more people. Use your critical thinking. Use your common sense. Who knows what happened under the Eisenhower administration? There's very compelling possibilities. But as far as declaring it real, or, the Dulce Underground battle where 278 American troops were killed fighting with the aliens in their underground base, hey, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't happen. But to say it happened because you believe it happened, because it's, really romantic and exciting, and somebody that takes it really seriously, so why shouldn't you? Crank it back a notch and, do your homework.
And then you'll just get left at the same dead end that the rest of us get left at.
Well, you know what? Sometimes that's the place to be because it's real and it's a starting point.
But I have to tell you, of all of the ones that I've heard, the one that I feel is the most credible, and I'll give you my reasons, but the most credible is the notion of reptilians in some kind of underground realm. About the humans and reptilians working with each other, I don't know. But and I only come to that based on the mythological record, because the mythological record supports that notion, at least in antiquity.
Yeah. Maybe. I should say here, though, that many years ago, when I first heard the term relative to the UFO phenomena and beings and, secret human things of secret underground bases, I think I laughed. It sounded so Flash Gordon to me. But I have learned in the intervening years, and it's simply a fact, that there are classified underground facilities all over the world. I mean, they're used for medical research. They're used for military purposes, for intelligence purposes. Look at the hardware that we know about that can create them, bearing in mind that there are huge natural underground caverns. Anybody that's ever been to Carlsberg or Howe Caverns or other ones around the world, these huge limestone caves that go on in some cases for miles and miles, that, can be 800 feet or, 8,000 feet underground. Who knows? In New York City, they've been digging the 2nd Avenue subway for decades. But the machinery that they're using, it looks like it's out of science fiction. Think of the fact that a tunnel, a more than 30-mile long tunnel, connects England and France. The machines that were used, literally, they're like something out of Frank Herbert's Dune. They're like these giant worms that chew through rock and spit it out the other end. There is a facility in England called Rudloe, Rudloe Manor, which is until it was outed, a classified small city that was built years ago. I believe it's under the Salisbury Plain, connected by, which is very near where Stonehenge is, connected by a appropriate transportation tunnel to London, which in the event of, cataclysm, natural disaster, any number of things, was designed to house the movers and shakers, the most important elected officials, members of the royal family, etc., for X amount of time, in a completely self-sustaining manner. We have the equivalent here for members of Congress and the president, etc. These things are real. They exist. Now, when you want to get into the possibilities of other intelligences manning them, sure, why not? I think that kind of makes sense on a certain level. And then the hyper questionable possibility of us interacting with them, again, it's purely speculative. Anything is possible in this crazy world, especially in the realm of things that we're talking about. The likelihood is debatable, but I can't fully discount that possibility.
It sounds like you draw the line. It sounds like you believe in UFOs because
No,
you feel,
no, I
oh,
don't believe
okay.
in UFOs. And maybe because I'm a writer and I love language. Um, Years ago, I lost the luxury of disbelief because I had worked too hard and too long, in great part at the side of one of the seminal researchers, Bud Hopkins, who I was friends with for 35 years, worked as his assistant for about half that time. And in that time alone, not counting my own work, was privy to, met with, spent time with, saw extraordinary evidence supporting the claims of many people who felt or knew that they had had these abduction experiences, backed up by multiple witnessing, anomalous implants, scarification appearing overnight, a history of the same thing in the family testified to by parents or grandparents. In some cases, the records of the mental health professionals, of course, all this with their permission, who had worked with them and took their cases seriously, and so on down the pantheon. I don't believe in UFOs any more than I believe in the chair that I'm sitting in. What they represent, what they may be manifestations of, is something else. I didn't mean to jump on you there, but
Oh, that's okay.
yeah, for me, it's important to make those distinctions sometimes.
Okay, then I'll frame it in a different way.
Please do.
Okay. It seems more cogent to you that there's the possibility that there are some kind of non-human entities that exist in the universe, multiverse, wherever you want to call it. But when it comes to some of this other stuff, this conjecture that we hear, it's a little harder for you to wrap your mind around it.
Well, I guess that's one way to say it. I guess the other way is that I have seen several hundred cases of credible evidence for the former, but not for the latter. My mind is open to change. Again, I don't discount it. Um, Knowing that the former is as real as it can be, from my point of view, opens up the very real possibility that there can be extensions of it that sound wilder or more dramatic. But show me the beef.
um, I have worked in the ghost hunting community and do work with clients to deal with attached entities, these non-corporeal beings, as well as thought forms that they've generated where they think they have some ghost attached to them. In the UFO community, are you finding now that people are becoming more comfortable with the idea of UFOs and extraterrestrial life, that there is a rise in the number of cases reported? Or, yeah, I'll just end there.
That's very well said. A rise in the number of cases reported as opposed to an increasing number of cases. And I would say yes. Let's remember here that an overriding factor that literally sprang into life as the beginning of the modern age of UFOs did in the summer of 1947, called ridicule, has attached itself to this subject. What I'm seeing as somebody who is out there in this world on a day-to-day basis is that, and it's not happening in some massive sweeping way, but it's happening. More and more people seem to care less and less about what other people think about their opinions on this subject. And that is resulting in an increase in attendance of people who have never been at a UFO conference, who are tuning in documentaries, who are reading the books, who are finding that they have friends around them who are interested in the same subject, but hadn't brought it up with them because they thought that they would be the target of being made fun of. Next week, I have a small speaking job in nearby city of Rochester in our home state. It is a monthly group. It comes under the umbrella of meetup groups, and there are a number of UFO meetup groups around the country, as well as ones that go under other names and things. The Rochester one is terrific. They have a base of about 50 members at least. They meet once a month. They meet once a month like clockwork. They bring in speakers each month, or they Skype them in. These people network with each other, and they are kind of a core group in their community who are helping to educate other people around them. So yes, I do feel that more and more people are willing to make, their interests known. Distinction here, though, in terms of reporting UFOs, if you see something and you want to report it, up to 1968, hypothetically, you could have reported it to the Air Force in Project Blue Book, which we now know was more a public relations manifestation, and that the real work was being done, deeper down the intelligence community. But are you going to call your newspaper and report it and give your name and have that in the paper? Or are you going to call your local police department and report it? Because you're concerned about ridicule there. What I'm saying here is, if you want to make a difference, if you want to report something like this, the two logical places are the UFO Reporting Center, run by my dear friend and colleague Peter Davenport in Washington State, and MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which is the largest UFO organization out there. And they also collect and publish these statistics. That's the longest answer to your short question.
Okay. We've kind of talked about myth. We talked a little bit about the Bible. We talked about people's belief systems. What are your thoughts about the Vatican kind of getting on board with the concept of other races being out there and we're not the only one, which has kind of been the core of Christianity for a long time?
Isn't that fascinating? Yes, I'm glad you brought it up. For anybody that this is kind of a jarring statement, this is not only true, but true in overdrive. It's a story I've been following for over 20 years, and how doubly intriguing it is that a religion, one of the world's great religions, in terms of impact, in terms of membership, that really is the most organized in terms of control and absolute dogma, is the one that in essence is leading the way to assist its flock in making this transition. Years ago, the Vatican the University set up a chair of studies in this area. And up until he passed, I guess about half a dozen years ago, a prelate appointed by the Pope, Monsignor, I think Cardinal Balducci, was their point man on, yes, we accept the idea that we are not alone in the universe, and that these other intelligences are not, as perhaps was understood or put forward in earlier times, manifestations of Satan, that they are genuine, sentient beings that happen to come and go from our planet for reasons we can only guess at, and that there may come a time when all this is made public and we need to prepare ourselves. I always used to joke with myself in the early years of this that what was really behind it was, when the Martians land or the Zeta Reticulans, we got to have people ready to bring them to Jesus. And, maybe that's partly true. It also opens up some deep thinking on, are these spiritual beings? Are they, like as portrayed in the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, soulless, ants in a hive mentality? Or are they advanced beings who have their own notions of, a creator, or of, their own mythology? Both may be the case. We don't know. But yes, the Catholic Church takes this subject very seriously indeed. And there's no question about that.
But isn't that just, to me, that is just so fascinating that there are actually, probably for the first time in the history of the church, taking a forward stance on something that's going on instead of trying to suppress it like everything else, inquisitions kind of come up to
Exactly.
mind.
Exactly. And I think this is only moving forward under the current Pope, who has proven himself to be a remarkable individual in so many respects. And um, I think it's a very positive sign. I hope it's a positive sign. If such a previously unflinching structure can grow, can even have the courage to be leaders in this area in the world of theology, maybe, there is hope for all of us. At the other extreme are people, and I use the word fundamentalist as something that attaches to any religion, where you are so rigid in your belief system that there is no room for, you know, um, interpretation of dogma. It is what it is, and that's all there is to it. Fundamentalist Christians take the point of view that all UFO phenomena, and I mean deeply fundamentalist Christians of a certain ilk, are, the minions of Satan, and the signs and portends of what's going to be seen before the end times. And I have gone at it with some of these folks with respect. I'm one of the few people that I know that at a certain point made it very clear that I would debate this in any forum, and did, with folks who take this point of view that it's all manifestations to confuse us, to lead us away from Jesus, etc. When, with respect, I don't think that's the case at all.
I don't think it's the case either. So we agree again.
Yes,
no,
ma'am.
We agree again. If contact was made by the extraterrestrials, what do you think the impact would be on society at large? And I'm not talking, your scenario, we have these giant ships, you were talking about the giant ships, and I was thinking Independence Day, with Will Smith.
Yeah, that was good.
That was a good movie.
That worked out great.
That was kind of my thought when you made that comment. Okay, that might be a little overkill. It might freak people out.
Literally and figuratively.
I could see that. But if the proverbial ship landed on the White House lawn, one, and it's not too big, kind of the size of a Volkswagen, what do you think the impact of, where we have this tangible proof, where there is, a shaking of hands, not that I would want them to shake the hands with any of our current political leaders. The Dalai Lama comes to mind every time.
Take Congress with you when you go, please.
Well, it's just kind of, it's just a little bit scary when you think about if contact is made, who they would be meeting with, and what kind of a warmonger they might happen to be, where I think having a spiritual leader would be better. But anyway, ship lands on the White House lawn. It's on, CNN.
Number one, as far as contact being made, it's probably been made millions of times with individuals who then go forward and say, I had this experience, and people either believe them or don't believe them. It may have a tremendous effect on their life. And maybe part of what's going on now is over this period of decades or this century or this few centuries to create more and more awareness to a point where you have a critical mass in society that can and will accept this when it comes, and give the other members of society an opportunity to come along with them. Literally, if a classic UFO landed on the White House lawn, within a matter of moments, it would be bombed, strafed, blown up. It would not be pretty. If, in a more allegorical sense, somehow these other intelligences could make or have made their presence known to select individuals, either in the theological world, the economic world, the political world, would we have learned about it? We live in a culture of secrecy, beginning in the earliest post-war years, right around the time of the UFO phenomena. We also have the advent of the Cold War. And in my colleague Richard Dolan's wonderful terms, we live in a national security state. And his two books, Part 1 and Part 2, I should insert here, of the UFOs and the National Security State, are very important reading. Volume 3 will be along in a year or so. It's a difficult question to answer. As Stanton Friedman has said, for those in power, what they're focused on is these power sources, these unimaginable technology that powers these things, through uncountable light years. Whoever gets that first and can develop it, they rule the world. These are the terms that these Earth people are thinking in. They're not thinking in terms of, let's put our differences aside and have one world where we all think of ourselves as human beings first, and Americans, Russians, Italians, Canadians second, and men and women third, and, Christians, Jews, Muslims fourth. All of these conflicts, all of these differences serve the power structure. The last thing I think they want, imagine if a force came along to make it very clear that we were not alone in the universe, and that there were intelligences out there that meant us good or bad. It would be almost inevitable that a byproduct of it would be that more and more people would start to think of themselves as people, as human beings, that we have a lot more in common with each other, no matter how different we are, than we do with them. And that would challenge the whole notion of nationalism, where we draw the line in the dirt. And if you cross that line in the dirt without my permission, I'm going to kill you, which has been the main preoccupation of human beings on Earth for, at least 7,000 years now. So you bring up a wonderful question that's filled with complexities. Again, if they were to reveal themselves en masse, we can't calculate how the world would respond. What they seem to be doing in just simply coming and going. And with their technology, there's no question in my mind that they can cloak their devices if they don't want us to see their craft or even them, that they can do that they can fuse our thinking, that they can create screen memories, or if you were to face a being with very different appearance than you, the physiology of human shock might kick in, and you would so profoundly reject what you were seeing that you would kind of come out of it with a notion that you had seen, a 4-foot white, snow white owl, or this kind of creature, or that kind of creature, partially shock, partially screen memories. Again, I'm talking away from the question now because I'm just not sure how to answer it. It would be, I think, a very positive thing if they could reveal themselves in such a manner, or responsible, courageous people in power could bring that information into the public realm in a way that would cause the minimum amount of panic and the maximum amount of potential cohesiveness among all of the warring tribes on this planet, and indeed among even the most sophisticated of us. That is what we are compared to the other, the ones that we love to hate that are so different than us.
The ones that we love to hate. Ooh.
Yes. Hello, ISIS.
I didn't say that. Anyway.
I did. And they deserve it. They deserve it.
Do you think disclosure will ever happen? Well, I guess I'm going to make this a two-part question. Do you think the government really knows that extraterrestrials and UFOs exist? And if that's the case, do you think that they will ever admit it?
Of course they know. Of course they know. Why keep the secret? Well, perhaps, and let's talk about it in the most conventional way possible, that we've known about it since the summer of 1947, when in reality we've probably known about it longer, and that indeed a study group was pulled together by President Truman that summer, we'll call it MJ-12, that rather than doing what in my heart of hearts, having read Truman's memoirs, read all of his published letters, studied the man as a fascinating person in the 20th century, and every man thrust into the most powerful position in the world, a straight talker who was an honest guy and said what was on his mind. If it had been left up to Truman, that after a number of months of study, he would have gone to the American people, and by extension the world, and said, my fellow Americans, it's my solemn duty to tell you blah, 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 and the world would have changed forever then, and possibly for the better. However, I think what happened was that study group, the members of that group around him, who are now experiencing the height of power. They're the 12 members of the ultimate cabal. They're the keepers of the biggest secret. The president wants to dissolve the group and go public? No, 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 no. And so that moment in history becomes that piece of sand, that irritant, that the pearl of security, national security, the obsession with secret keeping, forms around. And so we live in a world, of sleepwalkers and those of us that are awake to some degree or another, deniers and people that are aware that we're not alone in the universe. And please redirect me again to the exact nature of your question.
Will they ever disclose it based
yeah.
on where we are now? Do you
Right.
think they'll ever disclose it?
Right. Well, let's think about it again in conventional American terms. If the president were ever to go forward and just go on television and say, my fellow Americans, it's my solemn duty, first of all, it could never happen because we don't live in that kind of world anymore. It would have to be coordinated with other world leaders. It would have to be coordinated with the power brokers within the military intelligence establishment. But let's just say, in a fantasy sense, that the president would do that. He wouldn't do it. And the first reason is very mundane in a sense. To admit that would be to say, in effect, my fellow Americans, every American president in my party, in the other party, way to the right of me, way to the left of me, since and including Harry Truman, is an unindicted co-conspirator in the greatest cover-up in history. Politicians are not fond of doing that to themselves, so it wouldn't happen. Now, I think one of the reasons the secret is being kept, and I'm being hypothetical here, is how bloody little we've learned, actually, over time, about them in almost 70 years. That's embarrassing, especially to these overstuffed military, political, intelligence egos. I don't think, and I'm sorry to say, and I have not just friends, but dear friends who have tremendous courage and commitment to the disclosure movement, both here and abroad. I think it's crucially important, and every small chapter of the disclosure movement in India, in Sweden, in Canada, in America, in Brazil, is a core of educators moving out into the world and making this more real for other people. I think it's crucially important. However, do I think that the American government is willingly ever going to go forward and disclose what it knows or some of it knows? No, I don't. However, I think disclosure is inevitable, and it's going to happen one way or the other. Perhaps it might happen in the form of like a WikiLeaks dump of information, or an Ed Snowden dump of information, or one thing that I find fascinating is over the decades since we first started going around the moon, there are tens and tens and tens of thousands of high-resolution photographs of the surface of the moon that show anomalous artificial stuff going on there. It's a fact. It's a fact. But they're ignored by the major media. If a good body of these photos got out and, say, some credible news organization decided, you know what the hell, this may destroy us, but let's just do it and dump these things on the world, there'd be too much that you could confirm. Any astronomer with a powerful telescope anywhere around the world could go to those coordinates and see these things for themselves. Whether they're contemporary, whether they're ancient, isn't the question. Also, what might happen ultimately is that they or some group or a group of these other intelligences may say, you know what, it's time. We've been, kicking this around for several thousand years. People are aware of it in some senses. We've been really focusing in on them becoming increasingly aware of our presence the last 70 years. By our timetable, we are now going to make ourselves known. They may be the ones to disclose, but will we, the government, right, like you and I are the government of the United States, ever going to do this willingly? I doubt it.
You mean we're not? Oh, man.
I know, it's a shock. I'm glad you were sitting down. I know I was.
I thought like I was in charge of everything. I have a pillow that says Queen of Everything. I mean, doesn't that make me be important?
Pretty much.
Anyway, yep. What do you think? What do you think? I'm assuming you know who Jim Sparks is.
I know who he is. I'm not. It's one of the names of people making certain claims out there.
Well, I mean, one of the things he talked about in his book, which I don't remember the title because it was like 9 years ago when I interviewed him, but he brought up a really interesting, although hard to swallow point, but goes along with what you're saying, was that the only way we would ever get the government to disclose is if we as the people were able to forgive them for the secrets.
You know what? I have to agree with Jim 100% on that. I think in life, and most of us carry around grudges, we nurse dislikes. Unless you're a saint, it's very difficult to not do it. I am guilty of it as anyone else. In fact, I'm completing a major paper right now that is being done in a very aggressive spirit, aimed at deceptions that I am putting forward, that were put forward last month in England regarding Rendlesham. I think Jim's point is crucially important. I recently finished a paper based on years of research about the origins of the disclosure of the ridicule factor, how I feel it began, why I feel it began, and why the media has basically been the government's running dog on this and continued overall to demean, dismiss, explain away this until we can get to the point where we can forgive them for coming on board with this notion that, UFOs are silly and let's stick to important topics here. It's going to just make it more difficult. And it's a good lesson in life anyway, but bravo for Jim for making that point.
Well, and this was like 10 years ago, but the aliens told him.
Well, whoever told them, it could have been some voice in his head saying it was the aliens, which doesn't necessarily make it so. The main thing,
his story, just to give him a couple of points, is that he's a multiple abductee. Okay. And he says that they have been training him in a school and whatever. And he has actually a very nice relationship with the extraterrestrials. That's
good.
His thing. Anyway, moving on. Okay. Slightly different variation of where we just were. Short of the proverbial ship landing on the White House lawn.
Right.
What do you think it's going to take for us as, a civilian, internet surfing people to believe that that extraterrestrials are real and we are being visited by UFOs?
Undeniable, actual, provable, confirmable evidence, which dismisses about 90+% of all of the specious nonsense on the internet. The internet is, of course, miraculous. I don't know how it works. I don't know anybody who knows how it works. It's just the closest thing to magic that I can imagine. You think of the most arcane topic in the world, you type it into a box, you push a button, and you have access to millions of words on it and pictures and all that stuff. It is a double-edged sword in terms of UFO studies, in that anybody can now look up anything relative to this subject and get information that has a strong, well-researched, historic, scientific, cultural base, or represents itself as such. And don't even get me started on the world of photographs and film footage of alleged, anomalous objects. When I do presentations and refer to captured images, there are, of course, some fabulous ones that are credible that have come out in digital, this digital era that we live in. But for me, I often fall back on film photographs predating digital technology, which are much easier to either confirm as something, 60 feet across, a quarter mile away, that is a whatever it is, or a hubcap, being tossed in front of the camera lens. I, like, a lot of people who have been doing this long enough, have built up an actual real library of some hundreds of books, masses of files and publications. It is a hard copy. I kind of, live inside of a USB storage device here, except that, it's the difference between the technology in a smartphone and the computer that took up, a giant room in the Pentagon that's a lot less powerful, that got us to the moon and back. I think, again, for me, anybody's greatest tools in convincing themselves or others of the reality of this phenomena is their common sense and their critical thinking. If you don't apply them, it doesn't matter what your information source is. And if you want to believe, as the X-File poster says, you will believe, and you'll believe what you want to believe. And you'll find other people who believe the same thing. And guess what? You're a member of a new religion, because your belief is based on faith, supported by the faith and belief of others. And it's a perfectly contained little ecosystem where, in reality, it may be representative of nothing real, nothing tangible, nothing that ever happened. But hey, world religions have been built on less. And that is my belief. Again, if there was a phrase I remember many years ago, that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. It's a phrase I don't subscribe to necessarily, but I think you get what I'm saying here. If you are somebody that's just been going through your life, living your life, every once in a while you hear about this subject, you're conditioned to think that it's wink, wink, nudge, nudge, ha ha, flying saucers, little green men. And then you have a sighting or an experience, or somebody that you know and love and trust confides to you that they have, you have cause to not only question, but it may be your own little personal BCAD, where your life changes and moves off an entirely different direction, because you now know in your experience that it is real, or you have had an experience that has compelled you to feel and believe that way. I don't know otherwise. We've become so conditioned, with good cause, to distrust our, what we'll laughingly call, leaders, because they overall have done anything but be statesmen or stateswomen or show real leadership and courage. They're politicians. They're in it for the power, the money, the prestige, and that's the name of the game, money being the operative effect here. And in fact, we live in an oligarchy. Whether or not we'll ever be able to recover our democracy, especially after whatever happens in this coming election, is very much in question. For me, reading the several thousands...
And we need to wrap up.
Okay, the thousands of pages of absolutely gilt-edged, declassified, authentic government documents, intelligence, military, whatever, that absolutely confirm notions of the reality of this stuff is a place to start for sure.
See you later.
Bye, whoever that was. Well, Peter, we need to wrap up here, and This was great. I got all my questions answered. And I guess if I believe that there are reptilians living in underground bases making human-alien hybrids to control the entire planet, it must be true, because I think it. Woohoo!
Well, There you go.
All righty.
We could have saved a lot of time today.
That's right. It's like, well, we're not going to have Peter. I'm just going to tell you this, and we're done. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on, and we will have to have you back on when I have more alien conspiracy stuff to talk to you about.
Well, you're welcome. You're not only welcome, Dr. Rita, but thank you in particular for asking such thoughtful, intelligent, inquiring questions.
Thank you. Well, we really need to go because the music's going to be coming up here in a second, okay?
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's Peter Robbins. His book is Left at Eastgate, a first-hand account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident and its cover-up and investigation. And next week, we have Christy Robinette coming on talking about signs and symbols, messages from the other side. And in the second hour, our good friend Frank Huguenard talking about spontaneous healing beyond space and time. Until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser